OSU is a game almost entirely run by the community itself. From supporters paying to keep the website running, to mappers and bitmap nominators making sure that we always have maps to play. And a huge part of this community are third-party app developers, who make dedicated apps just to make our life as an OSU player a little bit easier. Apps like, for example, Makosu, or Rewind, or Practice Diffmaker, or Discord bots like, for example, BathBot. All of these apps are made by simple players who thought that the original client lacked something, so they decided to add it themselves. But recently something happened that broke almost half of third-party apps out there. I'm talking, of course, about the January 8th stable update. The update documentation reads that they reduced the size of the bitmap database by reducing the overheads in SR storage. We're gonna get to what that means a little later, but here also says that these two changes should reduce the bitmap database size on disk by up to 70% and memory usage by up to 66%. The first time I read it, I thought it was about reducing the size of the bitmaps folder, like where the maps are stored. But it turns out that the only thing that was reduced is the size of the osu.db file and the scores.db file. Those two files are responsible for storing all of the information about the bitmaps you have available and also the local scores that you've set on those bitmaps. And these two files are the exact reason why some of the third-party apps just simply broke. For example, if we launch Makosu, we can see that we have no bitmaps available, because as I already mentioned, all of the information about the bitmaps that you have available is stored in the osu.db file. And if the structure of the file somehow changed, that means that Makosu can no longer read the file properly, and therefore it doesn't know which maps you have. Same goes for example, Rewind, which is a replay viewer / replay analyzer type thing. If we try opening any replay here, it will just load forever and we won't get anywhere. And if we check the logs, we can see that the last thing that it's trying to do is to get the osu.db file open. And for some reason it fails to do that and just gets stuck on this point. Now, there is a lot of apps that don't work since the update. I'm not gonna list all of them because I don't have the will nor the patience to go through with that. But the most popular ones that I know that no longer work are Rewind, Makosu, Practice Diffmaker, and Misanalyzer. But what exactly is the reason why they're broken? We know it has something to do with those two files, right? Well, to answer this question, I reached out to the one and only Dean Herbert Pepe. So I asked him, what exactly changed that made the files no longer readable by third-party apps? And he replied that basically the game no longer stores SR values for relax and touch mode combinations. Also, we switched to using doubles instead of floats, which I think he meant the other way around, because using doubles instead of floats will only increase the amount of space used, because doubles are double precision floats, which means that if a float is 32-bit, a double is 64-bit, and 64 is like twice as much as 32, and okay, you get the point. And also no longer storing the non-timing control points. So after his reply, it becomes quite clear as to what happened. Because as someone who knows a thing or two about coding, I know that in some cases, changing the variable type from a float to a double can break stuff. I don't know if that's what happens in this case, because it also might be the case that those non-timing control points are important for something when analyzing replays. But since I never developed any of those apps, I really have no idea what the issue is. So we just have to wait and hope that the third-party developers update their code and make it work again. But if you for some reason need to use one of those third-party apps, like right now, you can do that by replacing the osu.db file and the scores.db file with their old versions, which for osu.db you can find in the osu folder itself. There are multiple backups there, so you can just rename the file and it will work. But as for the scores.db, I personally didn't have a backup of it in my osu folder. So in order to get a scores.db file that actually works, you will probably want to ask a friend or someone who hasn't logged on in a while. And if you do end up changing both of the files, you will not break anything. If you launch osu, they will just update to the latest versions. But if that happens, the third-party apps will no longer work. So if you plan on doing this often, you should probably have like a backup folder and have the old files there and just copy them over when you want to use them and then copy them back if you want to play osu. Okay, so now we know what the update was and why it broke stuff. But it was worth it because like we're saving a lot of space, right? Well, not really. For me, the combined file size of these two files reduced by like 9 megabytes. So I thought maybe it's more impactful for people who have large databases with a lot of songs. So I reached out to a friend of mine who has about 120,000 bitmaps on his PC. If you're wondering, that takes about 600 gigabytes of space. And in his case, the new also.db file is 96 megabytes, and the old one was 88 megabytes. So for some reason, in his case, the file size actually increased, which is kind of surprising. Although it's probably that he just downloaded a lot of maps in the time from when the backup was made until today. But what his values show is that the also.db file doesn't really grow that much, because those measly 100 megabytes are almost nothing when compared to the 600 gigabytes of maps that he has. And this isn't really the case for most players, because for example, my also.db file is only 9 megabytes, and that is with me having like 13 gigabytes of bitmaps, which I have accumulated over the last 3 to 4 years. I also asked on Reddit, and some users apparently had their file size reduced by as much as 90%, so I guess it also depends on what kinds of maps you have. But really, those few megabytes aren't that important when we take into account that for most players, like 90% of all the space that OSU takes is just the bitmaps folder. But I think that saving a little bit of space overall is a good thing. And it's really unfortunate that it had to break some of the third-party apps in the process. While most of the popular projects like Mikosu are being worked on constantly, some of the older projects might be abandoned at this point, with the developer moving on and no longer rolling out updates. So I personally don't think that saving those few megabytes of space is really worth the amount of apps that will probably no longer function again. But yeah, that's about it for the database update. So I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!